Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Starr here with you again, and we are looking at Latin American independence today. And so if you take a look at our standard down below, we need to be able to kind of describe the movements and the rebellions in the Caribbean, Central and South America, and be able to analyze some of their causes, social, political, and economic, and the consequences that came along with the independence movement that we see spreading into Latin America. All right, let's take a look at what we've got here. So life in colonial Latin America was a little bit different than what we might be familiar with in other parts of colonial world here. And so we look, they were very much influenced by America and by France, specifically the American Revolution and the French Revolution, which we talked about earlier this year. And so those uprisings from Mexico, we're going to eventually see uprisings from Mexico all the way down to the tip of South America, kind of take on the same revolutionary fervor that we saw in America and England and France and eventually Russia, and continuing on and on and on. When we look at their colonies themselves, their economy was based on what we call mercantilism, which we talked about earlier on this year as well. The idea that all the wealth is already out there in the world, and the only way to make your country better is to steal that wealth from someone else. And so they were only allowed to trade with the home country, the country that had colonized their territory. And so like Mexico was only able to trade with Spain. And that created some animosity and issues between the Mexican people and Spain, obviously, or other Latin American countries as well. They were also formatted in what we call haciendas. And so the haciendas were these large farms and ranches that were typically given to noble people who were loyal to the king or queen of Spain at the time. And so they were kind of the ones in charge or in power of these large territories. They tended to use the Native Americans of Latin America as slave labor at this point. And we eventually see that when they start to run out of slave labor, the Native Americans, then they start to bring in other groups of people from Africa to be slaves as well. And so as disease lowers the population of Native Americans, they bring in those other groups as well to work their slave labor in their fields and other areas. Now, mainly these haciendas, they produced a lot of meat, hides, and sugar. Sugarcane was like the cash crop of Latin America at this time. Their society was highly organized and really kind of created some issues when we look at the issues between the colonizers and the colonized people. And so if we look at this social hierarchy, was really strict. We have these royal officers here that are involved. We have owners of these large estates or haciendas that are involved here. Then we also see the people of these Latin American countries. They are workers, they're peasants, they tend to be slaves. And this hierarchy is very rigid. And so if we take a look here, a lot of racial discrimination came out of Latin America during the colonial era. A lot of people felt that the Peninsulares looked down upon them, and the Peninsulares were basically anyone who came from Spain or Portugal, the Iberian Peninsula. So they got the nickname the Peninsulares. And so those are all the people that came over to the New World. Again, they felt that they were better than the people that were already there. We also have the Catholic Church involved in all the colonial society here, and the Catholic Church was there to hopefully help to protect the Native Americans and the Native people of that area from being exploited by the Spanish or the Portuguese. Unfortunately, that didn't always happen. We see a lot of exploitation because the Catholic Church wasn't able to stop everything from happening. They're also here to convert Native American people as well. They wanted to convert people all across the world to Catholicism. And so if we look at this social hierarchy, you need to know kind of top to bottom our different groups here. And so at the very top, like we just mentioned, you have the Peninsulares. Those were people who were born, like we said, on the Iberian Peninsula, so either Spain or Portugal. And they tended to be the landowners, the people that owned the haciendas, and they tended to be royal officials, maybe governors or intendants, people that were in charge of essentially the territory that was controlled by Spain. Underneath the Peninsulares, we have Creoles. Creoles were the white people that were born in the colonies. And so basically, these are the children of the Peninsulares. And so yes, if we look at it here, a lot of them tended to be wealthy too because they were the children of the Peninsulares, the wealthy landowners. But the worst thing about this is the Peninsulares tended to look down upon even the Creole people. So they faced a lot of discrimination from the Peninsulares as well, even though in a lot of cases they were the children of the Peninsulares. all right, because they were not born on the Iberian Peninsula. They were not Spanish. They were not Portuguese. They were born in the New World, basically. The next group down we have is the Mestizo group, which are people who are a mixed heritage of Native American and European ethnicities. Underneath that, we have people who are called mulattoes, which were people who were, again, European and African heritage. And then finally, at the very bottom, we have the Native Americans and the Africans who were viewed as slaves and the slave labor of the society. Again, so a lot of racial discrimination from top to bottom. One of the first places that experienced a full revolution at this point in Latin America was Haiti. And so if we take a closer look at Haiti, Haiti was a French colony. They had a very large African slave population. And in 1791, there was an uprising in Haiti. The mulattoes and the slaves decided that they wanted to have equal treatment, that everyone else would be treated equal across the island of Haiti here, or the country of Haiti, I should say. Toussaint Louverture was the man that actually helped to free the slaves and helped to lead the revolt. So obviously, originally a Frenchman here with his name, and he helped to lead this revolt. Eventually, what's going to happen is in 1802, Napoleon decided to send troops. Yeah, Napoleon Bonaparte. We're going back in time a little bit from where we've been talking. But Napoleon Bonaparte will send troops to try to re-strengthen their control on Haiti because they didn't want to lose it. Haiti was a great place to grow sugarcane, which was kind of their cash crop. And they didn't want to lose all the money that they had invested into Haiti at that point. He sends the troops down. The colonists end up winning. So the Haitians end up beating the French and proclaiming their own independence. And at that point, they renamed the island of Haiti. And at that point, they were basically able to defeat one of the strongest militaries in the world at that time. And they're the first country to gain their independence again. And that happens in 1802. We aren't going to see another country gain their independence for quite a while after this. But it kind of plants that seed in Latin America and the Caribbean that, hey, we should have independence as well. Lastly, like we said, they were the first independent country there. If we look at some of the causes of rebellion moving forward beyond Haiti, we're going to see some of the issues pop up in other parts of Latin America as well. Charles III ends up becoming the king of Spain at this time. And his goal is to, number one, start to make reforms and changes to the church. All right, so that didn't necessarily go over real well with other Catholics throughout Latin America and throughout Spain. He also decides that he's going to take closer control of the colonies in Latin America. And so he appoints peninsulares as intendants and governors in the colonies. And that angers a lot of the people that live in the colonies at this time. They don't feel they need more oversight from the Spanish king. And so with that, we see some new economic policies. And the policies he puts in place are going to limit the competition inside the colonies. They're now basically only able to buy and get goods from Spain, and they are also only able to sell goods to Spain, which is actually already how they were. But now they can only buy goods from basically Spain itself. They also put in place heavy, heavy taxes, and that's going to hurt the people of the colonies, and it's going to anger them. And so because they're angry, we start to see these seeds of revolution and rebellion starting to spark in Latin America. And the first place we see this rebellion begin is in Mexico. As Napoleon, going back to Europe again, as Napoleon is attacking Spain, the colonies seize the opportunity to actually declare their independence. So Mexico declares their independence. They have a revolt in the year 1810, and it's led by the man in the upper picture there, Father Hidalgo. All right, so obviously a priest. And Father Hidalgo leads the Creole, Mestizo, and Native American army against the Spanish army that was in Mexico at the time. And they had a few early victories, but eventually Father Hidalgo was captured, executed, and literally his head was put on a stake as kind of a don't mess with the Spanish army. All right. And so he, unfortunately, and this first revolt doesn't really get to where they want it to be. Eventually, after Father Hidalgo's execution, Father Morelos, another priest here, kind of assumes control of this military that had formed, and they fight for more independence. They fight for land reform, and they were fighting to bring about an end of slavery at this time. Morelos was very much feared by the Peninsulares because he was there to make change, and he was going to basically throw them out of the power that they had and the wealth that they had. Eventually, he too is captured and executed. Head goes on a stake, just like Father Hidalgo's did. Eventually, 10 years later or so, we see the revolution of the 1820s. And now we see that the Creoles are also on board with this revolution and rebellion. And so we basically have everyone against the Peninsulares and the Spanish power here. The Creoles don't want to see more reforms happen to them in the New World versus what Spain is doing. And so they help the revolt. They take control, and Mexico becomes a republic in the year 1823. So they gain their independence in 1823 here. Other places are going to start to see independence movements sprout here as well. So as we look through the rest of Spanish America, which is our orange territory there on our map, we're going to start to see other revolutionary leaders come to power here. We see Simon Bolivar, Jose Francisco de San Martin, Bernardo Higgins, all become these kind of revolutionary leaders in Latin America and South America. They were all trained in the Enlightenment, and they all were trained in the ideas of the French Revolution. And so they have this idea, this kind of nationalism, this kind of revolutionary fervor that they had already learned about with the French Revolution. They started to lead their armies throughout southern South America and started to liberate these different countries as they went. And so as the independence battle went, we start to see these very bloody civil wars being fought against the Spanish. So Bolivar and de San Martin and O'Higgins fighting against the Spanish for control and for independence for those given countries. Eventually, the three generals all worked together. They freed about 10 countries from Spanish rule during their time, and Bolivar is kind of known as kind of like the George Washington of South America. He gets the nickname the Liberator. He also gets a country named after him, right? Bolivia. There are our three guys right there: Simon Bolivar, Jose Francisco de San Martin, and Bernardo Higgins. All right, so those are your three kind of revolutionary leaders in South America. So we've talked all about Spanish independence and those Latin American countries gaining independence from Spain, but there's one massive country that we haven't talked about, and that's because they don't have the same history as the rest of them. Whereas we saw a lot of bloody civil wars going on and battles for revolutionary means here in Spain and the other Latin American Spanish countries, Brazil has a different history. So when we look at Brazilian independence, going back again to Europe, Napoleon invaded Portugal. And when he did that, the leader, basically they call him Prince Regent, the Prince Regent of Portugal, Dom Uo, decided that the only place for him to go without being executed by Napoleon was to go to their largest colony. And so he went to Brazil. And so he fled from Portugal and went to live in Brazil. And while he was in Brazil, he ruled under the name King John VI. And he encouraged industry. He opened more ports for trade, and he was a very good ruler for Brazil during this time. After the defeat of Napoleon, he decided it was time to return back home to Portugal. And so he returned back home, and he tried to rule Brazil from Europe. And the Brazilians got pretty upset about that. They didn't like the fact that now he was thousands of miles away and trying to tell them how to live their lives. And so what eventually happens is the people of Brazil encouraged Dom Uo's son, named Dom Pedro, to declare Brazil independent, and he could rule in his father's place. And so that's exactly what Dom Pedro does in the year 1822. And his father just allows it to happen. He just says, all right, I understand. My son will rule Brazil. I will rule Portugal. And no bloody war, no issues whatsoever, basically a peaceful handover of power. And so Dom Pedro rules as the emperor of Brazil from 1822 until his death in 1831. Eventually, Dom Pedro II, his son, will succeed him here, and he will rule from 31 all the way till 1889. So a fairly peaceful handover of power and quite a bit different history than what we see in the rest of South America and Latin America. So after Latin America gained its independence, a couple things that came out here. Number one, the United States got involved, and honestly, the Latin American countries weren't super happy about this, but the United States created what they called the Monroe Doctrine at the time. And the Monroe Doctrine was basically this. It said that in 1823, the United States would not interfere in Europe if Europe didn't interfere basically in the Western Hemisphere. They didn't try to come over to the Western Hemisphere and take over or recreate new colonies in the Americas. This is a nice gesture, and it's partially one where the United States just didn't want European countries to come here and get entangled in domestic issues. But also, they were trying to keep the United States free at this time. They didn't want other countries coming here and taking territory that we might want to take in the future. And so Latin American countries, although it's a nice gesture, they didn't particularly like the fact the United States was kind of sticking their nose in their business. Here's a couple pictures of the idea here. The idea that it almost seemed with the Monroe Doctrine that the United States was claiming the entire two continents, North and South America here. Finally, some of the other issues that we see with Latin America, unity was a big problem. When we look at South America, it was really difficult, largely because of geography. It's a very large continent from north to south. We've got the giant Amazon rainforest in the middle. We've got the Andes Mountains. We've got numerous rivers and kind of plains and areas that are really separated from one another. So because of the distance and some of the issues that people had or different groups had with each other, with the rivalries, it became very difficult for them to become unified. Brazil maintained its unity, and they were kind of off on their own compared to the other Latin American countries here that had been Spanish controlled. The other ones, eventually, they wanted to put together a United States of South America, and they even met in Panama. Bolivar called a meeting to try to unite those countries of South America, but unfortunately, the Congress in Panama failed to promote unity, and they broke apart. They all believed it was a good idea. It just didn't happen. And so they all developed as their own independent nations. The other issues we see that popped up was a lot of internal problems. In fact, for the first 50 or 60 years, they had a lot of difficulties, largely between liberals and conservatives. The Creoles wanted to keep all the European ideas, right? That was kind of their family heritage, right? They were the children of the Peninsulares. And so they wanted to keep a lot of the conservative aspects of things, whereas the people of Latin America wanted major change. They wanted to see more power given to the people. And so in the 1800s, trade and industry helped to kind of distribute some of the wealth more evenly amongst the other countries. And we do see that a lot of times many of these nations eventually achieved political and economic stability, but it took a long time. And in fact, some of them are still having issues with that today, with good economic and political stability. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's what we have here for Latin American independence. We went all the way from seeing colonies starting to develop into rebellions and revolutions to some of the causes and now consequences of their Latin American independence. So if you have any questions on any of this, please get a hold of your teacher, and we will see you again soon.